John, another spot we got to get to is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They had a really fascinating week 12. They beat the Giants 30-7, blowout win. Giants have a tough game. They have 48 yards of offense in the first half. They come out in the second half and they start throwing the ball to Malik Neighbors every single play. He has catches on the first 3 plays of the second half, 7 targets across the first 2 drives of the second half. Winds up with a decent line. I took heart in that, and then you get his comments after the game, and they're like, we got to get him the ball. When they've done this multiple times this year where they didn't get him the ball in the first half, and they've come out in the second half and thrown it to him like every play. I think they're going to do that on Thanksgiving. This is being probably released after Thanksgiving. You guys will know more about it than I do, but I took some heart in the fact that they try really hard to get him the ball, but they had a tough offensive game was the point of what I was saying. The Bucs had the ball a ton, a lot of opportunity for their backs. The usage was fascinating. The first half, I mean, I joked in Stealing Signals that every week I could write like a whole odyssey about the Bucs running back usage, and that was true, like never more so than this game. In the first half, we get a bunch of Bucky Irving, we get Rachaad White starting, and then playing in the 2-minute drill, but basically not touching the ball other than that. He winds up with 5 touches in the first half total. We get Sean Tucker with 5 touches in the first half. He has a whole new role, Sean. He is the short yardage star. He gets a 3rd down toss play on a 3rd and 2. The defenders are out there, but he turns the corner, kind of fights through an almost horse collar, gains a yard, doesn't quite get the first. It's 4th and 1. They give it right back to him up the middle, and he converts it. They get down into the red zone. 1st and goal. Give it to Sean Tucker. Touchdown. Wow. Okay. 3 short yardage carry, scores a touchdown. This is awesome. Don't talk about what happened next. What happened next, John?
And it just, when you're watching these games and you're trying not to look at the bottom line, but the bottom line is there, and the Bucs come out of their bye and they're like, we did some internal evaluation and we think that Sean Tucker needs to touch the ball more. You're like, everyone on earth knows that. It's like, are you going to give him the ball? And then one of the things that was a little bit tricky this week, and one of the reasons why week 12 was pretty favorable for us, despite the bye-apocalypse, was that, Bucky was on the bye last week. He goes into every lineup in week 12. Tyrone Tracy, whom you mentioned, goes into every lineup. That one was disappointing because of the reality results, but also like Tyrone Tracy cutting through the Tampa Bay defense. You give him the balls at running back, cutting through the defense, looks unstoppable. Why do you make him take a snap out of the Wildcat and potentially hand off to someone? Now, granted, the mistake, the killer, the one that gets him benched and costs him all of the points that would have given him a decent fantasy result instead of what he got, which he basically still like borderline rescued with those catches in deep and garbage time. Like, just let him run a normal play. Right? So he fumbles after that stuff has happened, but he's beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers like they're not even there. Don't make him run a Wildcat play. Just hand it to him. So anyway,
fumble's a big part of this game.
Yes. Bucky goes in to all the lineups. I was having a hard time with his projection this week. We know that all the folks out there who do projections do a fantastic job. I talked about where he was in the game level similarity projections that we have at RotoViz, which use the specific actual results from the players, which obviously what factors into how people do projections as well, but then takes that and looks at how opposing defenses have fared against this type of back, gives you a range of outcomes. His projection in GLSP was a little better than some of the projections I was seeing out there. Obviously, GLSP doesn't know that maybe Sean Tucker will be involved. Maybe he won't. Is that going to come out of Rachaad White? Is it going to come out of Bucky Irving? You don't know. You're hopeful. Is it going to come exclusively around the goal line so that nobody can score except for Tucker? I thought he was going to have a much bigger game than the projections. That is the way it turned out. But, I mean, there are probably universes where it doesn't so much. But then this was a huge game for Bucky Irving, despite the fact that he was doing his Justin Jefferson tackled consistently at the 1 yard line, setting up plays for other people. Could have been much bigger even.
Right. So he got tackled at the 1 to set up Tucker's first touchdown. And I say first touchdown because there's going to be another opportunity here. Bucky Irving gets tackled at the 1 again and sets up Sean Tucker to come on and get another goal line carry. So he's now gotten back-to-back carries in the field of play on 3rd and 2 and 4th and 1, a goal line carry and another goal line carry. Clearly, he now has the short yardage role in the Buccaneers backfield, except he fumbled on that play at the goal line on his 4th short yardage carry. And he didn't see another carry the rest of the game. They had other short yardage opportunities. They didn't use him again. He caught a pass later in the second quarter, did not touch the ball in the second half, did have a complete mess up on special teams as well, which was fun. He's returning a kick. He lets it kind of go through his hands, doesn't know what to do, runs back and picks it up in the end zone. I believe he could have just kneeled on it still. I can't remember. I didn't really see. All I know is that they started this drive at the 2-yard line because he decides to take it out at the last minute because he doesn't want to take a safety, which probably was smart, to be better safe than sorry, but the 2-yard line is where he ends up putting his team. And so I think all of those things were like, look, we tried, Sean Tucker. We gave you an opportunity. You can't fumble the ball and then return a kick to the 2-yard line. You're no longer relevant. Rachaad White is like the veteran. He's the Zeke of this offense now, where he's just getting touches because somebody in the organization wants to give him some veteran deference or something. It's so fascinating because he's been so productive. And people listening probably like, you guys just hate Rachaad White. I've joked in signals a little more even than we have on the show. We've joked that like defenses don't guard Rachaad White for whatever reason. I've written that there's this league-wide conspiracy to let him score fantasy points every time he's on the field for some reason. There's just a wide open lane to run up the middle, or anytime he's had a good run. All the other runs, he just gets tackled in the backfield. But a bunch of his receiving big plays. I mean, I'm not kidding. Go look at Rachaad White highlights. This is not just like a biased comment. They're swing passes he catches, and I've given him credit for being smooth and catching and moving upfield in a quick way that is, helpful, that gets him downfield quickly. But he has like 10 to 15 yards to run before there's a freaking defender on the field or on the screen, of the game that you're watching. So anyway, he's had a lot of production that way. He started this game, as I mentioned, played the first couple of downs. Bucky takes over and plays the whole first half other than the short yardage stuff. Tucker ends up fumbling and basically doesn't play again. So as we go into the second half, Bucky ends up getting a carry at the 6-yard line and scoring a touchdown. Then later, very late, Rachaad White gets a toss play from the 1, does get to the corner and scores a 1-yard touchdown. Again, conspiracy to get Rachaad White points. He also gets all of the garbage time carries, Rachaad White. He gets 6 carries on the final 6 plays from scrimmage for the Bucs. Their final drive, they gave him the ball 4 straight times. He failed to convert a first down. He got up to 4th and 1, and he failed on 4th and 1. Surprise. So their final drive was just 4 straight carries to Rachaad White. The drive prior to that closed with 2 carries to Rachaad White that weren't successful. And he had a carry even just a couple plays prior to that. I think it was 7 of their final 8 plays. He has 7 fourth-quarter carries. He only finishes with 13 touches. So Rachaad White threw 3 quarters of a game where Bucky Irving had 18 touches in this game, and Sean Tucker had 5 touches, and there was a ton of running back touches. Rachaad White only had 6 touches through 3 quarters until the 4th quarter. He did not have a great game in terms of, what they came out of the bye and told you that they learned from Rachaad White. You mentioned they came out of the bye and said, we watched the film and we decided we need to use a little bit more Sean Tucker. It seemed very clear that they came out of the bye and were like, we're not going to use as much Rachaad White, even though, again, they let him start the game, had him as the nominal starter, but they took him out pretty quickly, didn't play him a lot in the first half. And then, again, I did note they used him in the 2-minute drill. He's still going to play on pass downs, it seems pretty clear, in the long down and distance stuff. And then with Tucker fumbling, Tucker might just be right back to number 3, right? So they might just give that work right back to Rachaad White, which is what it felt like happened in the second half when White got the toss play from the 1 and scored the TD that he did. Now, Tucker fumbled. I will note that in the second half, Rachaad White fumbles. It actually gets chalked up to Baker Mayfield, but White doesn't know that the play's a running play. Mayfield's trying to give the handoff to him, and he doesn't take it, and the ball just goes down on the ground. I think that was a lost fumble, and it was, in my mind, from what I saw and what I think the Bucs will see on film, entirely on Rachaad White, not on Baker. Baker was like, take the ball. What are you doing? Like, take the ball. This is a run play. And then after that, even Bucky fumbles as well. So you get all 3 backs on the Bucs side fumbling. You mentioned Tyrone Tracy fumbles on the other side and gets benched for a whole series. He misses a 13-play series right after that. comes back late for garbage time. So the note on Tracy that I had was they basically told him you're going to sit down for the next series, but it ended up being a 13-play series, and they only ran 55 plays. So it like dramatically impacted his snap share in the game. He did play after that series. They brought him back in for the final 2 series, and he had catches on each of those series as they were in really like come from behind mode.
And it was
Hoping
one,
that Tracy
I mean,
plays.
the drive, you could say that maybe it's a bad sign that they had their best drive with him on the bench, but it was a play too where Devin Singletary ends up scoring, and that would have been Tracy. So when you're trying to think about what is the outlook for Tracy, I think it's still mostly, and again, he's going to be playing tomorrow, but it'll be interesting to kind of think back on this after we have that information. It would seem to me like the danger to him is just how bad their offense is more than falling into a pure committee.
Right. Yep. That's what I was going to say too, is we'll see how it goes on Thanksgiving, basically, but that he's probably going to be the lead. I had him on Signals Gold. Got asked about his 41% snap share. I had him likely to play between 60 to 75% of the snaps again. Like, I don't think he'll be below 60%. He's been averaging 72% in the 4 or 5 games prior to this last week where he had 41%. I think he'll be a little bit down from that, maybe in the 60%, 65% range, but maybe even just right back to a 70, 75% snap share. Who knows? Anyway, he's had multiple games over 80% too, just for the context of what, my 60 to 75% was considering my estimation there. But the Bucky is the key name here overall, which you had already said, but I just kind of wanted to go through it. He also plays really well. He has all 6 of his catches in the first half, so they're throwing him the ball. Instead of the Rachaad White, it's passing to Bucky is what we're doing. When they get pinned at the 2-yard line because of the Sean Tucker miscue in the second half, they give the ball to Bucky 2 plays in a row. He gets a little bit of a short gain or something, and then he gets like a 46-yard gain. It's like, all right, well, I'll just solve this problem that we're way back in our own zone. I'm going to weave through traffic, break a bunch of tackles, have this. It was a really exciting run. He ends up with 87 rushing yards, 64 receiving yards, 150 total yards, a TD that I mentioned wasn't even one of the goal line touches. You'd love to see him get some of those goal line touches. But with Tucker fumbling and potentially now being completely out of the offense, I've been a Tucker stan, but we don't get a positive outcome here with this new role. Like, I feel like he got a new role and then he lost it. That's even better for Bucky, who was being prioritized clearly ahead of Rachaad White, was sort of the point of me breaking down all of the White stuff. It's not so much to say, oh, you can't play White or whatever, because I do think White now benefits from Tucker kind of messing up, unless they also look at these other fumbles. It'll be so fascinating to see what they do in week 13 after an odyssey of week 12 usage, as I said. But the clear winner, the clear answer here, because I think there's concerns for White. That's what I was trying to emphasize with the 7 fourth quarter touches and only 6 touches through 3 quarters. And there's obvious concerns for Tucker. It was mildly exciting in the first half, but then he doesn't even touch the ball in the second half, other than on the kick return. The clear answer is that they wanted to get Bucky Irving more involved as their lead, not as the secondary back working off of Rachaad White. He's got to be valued over Rachaad White immediately going forward. He was effective in that role. Rachaad White was not effective. He ends up with 37 rush yards on 12 carries at the end of this game. He gets that TD. He has 1 catch for 10 yards. White will catch more passes, I believe. I do think he's not like completely out of the equation to score fantasy points. But Bucky Irving looks like he's going to be the starter on a team that I look at the team high value touches over at Stealing Signals every week. The Bucs are leading the NFL in high value touches per game on a team level, and by a solid margin. I mean, and especially over like 4th place. There's a little bit of a drop off to some of the other top teams. The Lions are up there. The Dolphins are up there. The Bengals are up there. These backs that we love, right? Gibbs and Achane and Chase Brown, these guys are generating a lot of high value touches. The Bucs, what's been so exciting with Sean Tucker, for example, in addition to Bucky and White, is that they have generated a lot of running back value. They throw to their backs. They will use their backs on the goal line. We talked about how all 3 of the backs got some goal line or some green zone touches in this game, at least 1. They all scored a touchdown. All 3 of them scored a rushing touchdown. They will generate value. And Bucky looked like in the first half of this game, before it got out of hand, he was completely consolidating that. Other than some of the goal line and short yardage stuff that Tucker was taking, who then seems to have lost that. Bucky could be massive the rest of the way.
As I was watching the first half, I had this moment of just pure joy, because when they are throwing him the ball, I flash back to all those conversations that you and I had on the show in the offseason where we said, the thing about Bucky Irving is that if he is that much better than White as a runner, at some point it will also make no sense for the Bucs to continue to try and involve White as a receiver, because Bucky is also good at that. Then we kind of go through the year and you're like, man, White is even worse as a runner than you would really have thought, even with how poorly he played the first couple of years, but he's playing extremely well as a receiver. Yeah. So they're probably not going to make that flip. And then when it happens this week, again, it's a physical sensation of, so thrilling to see.
It's what we do it for as analysts. You're trying to be right for the right reasons. It's a great point. You're the one who came up with that specific note. We talked about it a ton throughout the rest of the year. I know I referred back to it a million times, but you made that specific point, and I don't know if you can be more right for the right reasons than that Bucky would be so much clearly better as a runner that then eventually it would also seep into the pass game, even if White was effective as a receiver, which is what we acknowledged. It has played out exactly that way. Exactly that way. It wasn't the only reason we were on Bucky, obviously. There's a lot of other reasons to be really excited about Bucky, but that specific discussion of how things might go this year, even with White being so successful as a receiver. Great piece of analysis there, Shawn. That is a great, as you brought that back up, I hadn't thought of that recently. I'm sure a lot of the listeners had the same response that I did. It was like, oh yeah, like I forgot about that. And damn, that's very good. That was very, very strong.
Well, every week I watch him run and I'm thinking to myself, Shawn, keep in mind, this dude is tiny. And if any athletic testing is to be believed, like not very athletic, like some of this is fluky. But then you see those plays. And Ben, last week I did a little bit of a more global look in the intro to the Zero RB universe. And one of the main notes there was that among backs with at least 75 carries, Bucky Irving is the only player to average at least 2.5 yards after contact, 2.0 yards before contact, and a 20% evasion rate. So one of the reasons why I kind of like those numbers is that, I mean, I really like these backs who have the balanced profile. It's not the only type of back you're going to draft or like, obviously, but when the player can do both, show both things, and the evasion suggests that he's doing some of it himself and could continue. Again, those numbers are going to bounce around, but you're getting some extreme skill elements here that are showing up in the numbers. You like to have that all wrapped together. Then he had the lowest bust rate and was number 4 in their points above average per attempt, which again is this interesting, arguably weird thing that they do where they take EPA and then they divide the responsibility every play among the players who are out there on the field. So that part, interesting. At the very least, these guys toward the top are probably not bad. It is interesting to me. I was kind of mentioning that Najee Harris gets a really positive adjustment, which I don't think is justified because he doesn't gain yards. It's one of those deals where if you do evade a lot of tackles but don't gain,
there's an acceleration. Yeah.
So, and again, I've mentioned on the show a few times that Bo Nix has a big adjustment, which for me, I want to be like, yeah, maybe some of that's true. If you're a Bo Nix skeptic, you're like, his actual numbers tell you what he's doing, which is not good. Well, thankfully, more recently, it's just been straightforwardly good. But that's coming into this game. And then you see those 2 big plays. And the question that you have and the fear that you have is someone who is small is going to go down when they're contacted, and someone who is not fast in a straight line won't be able to do that much with the juking. You know, maybe again, some of these things are fluky. We won't see huge plays from him, but it's been a ride and he is very, so then the thing I wanted to ask you, Ben, is where does he actually fit now? Right. So I'm looking in our weekly explorer at the fantasy scoring tab. We also have a fantasy points tool that gives you a lot of different formats. Obviously there are lots of places you can find fantasy points. I'm not saying that's unique, but going through here, we have Saquon Barkley over 24 points per game. I don't think anybody is confused about what he's currently doing. Joe Mixon over 21, Henry over 20. Mixon, the one, I mean, it's easy to say coming off of a bad game. I'd be interested to know where you have him related to Bucky rest of the way. We have Kamara, Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs. Those guys over 18, some of them over 19. Walker just under 18. Achane just over 17. Kyron, some confusing and frustrating things there, but right at 17. Brees Hall just below 17. Jacobs with the huge 3-touchdown game is almost up to 17 now. We know Montgomery is in there at 16.5. That to me is probably kind of the area just below Jacobs, but above Montgomery, where maybe you might start to put him in. We've got Chuba just below that. We have James Cook just below that. A little bit of a fall off to the next tier. Rest of season.
I think that's right.
Are there names in there, even among the guys who are at pretty extreme levels where, I mean, yeah, how do you see Bucky in his actual scoring as we go down the stretch?
I think that's a great place to put him. When I mentioned the tiers I did last week, I had, a big first tier. We have a lot of the really good players that you mentioned. It ended up being like 11 deep, includes, I included Chase Brown at the very back of that, and then Kyron and Montgomery and Jacobs as a second tier, which, I mean, I don't know, your mileage may vary, right? But I had those guys, like 14 backs. And then I had another tier break, and then I had James Cook and Tyrone Tracy, and had Jonathan Taylor in that next tier, Brian Robinson, Chuba Hubbard. You go on. I think, yeah, that second tier break, where, like you said, after Jacobs but before some of those other guys, would make a lot of sense right now. Like, Bucky should be right in that range. He should be like around James Cook, that comes in right next. I don't think you can put him ahead of Josh Jacobs. I don't think you can put him ahead of David Montgomery just because of like the touchdown equity. Maybe I had David Montgomery. I don't know. Montgomery, one of the things we talked on the pod recently, I was talking about how I don't think there are that many backs in the NFL that have more TD equity than either of the Lions backs. How they basically both score touchdowns every week. I mean, that declaration, I think, last week, and then they scored 3 combined TDs again this week. But that was more about Jahmyr Gibbs, where I don't think Montgomery's touchdown potential cuts into Gibbs all that much. Gibbs will still get his. Montgomery can he only had like 35% snaps in this game. Like, Gibbs gets up to like 65%. If Montgomery doesn't score a TD, he doesn't have a ton to him. You have to play him. Maybe I have him too high. I had him ahead of Jacobs when I did this last week. I would definitely flip that after Jacobs had the massive workload and big game. Jacobs' usage has been so strong. It also took a ton of missed tackles forced and a high evasion rate from Jacobs just to get to like 4.1 yards per carry in this game and 100 rush yards on 26 carries. He had like 106 yards and 26 carries, 3 touchdowns. He makes a ton of guys miss, which is great, but similar to the Najee thing, it's like you're not actually getting a ton of yards. But I mean, he did.
Jacobs led the NFL in getting hit at the line of scrimmage by a wide margin. Now, some of that is just that he had so many carries, and then he was able to defeat that situation. My thought is that the Packers are not necessarily setting him up for much efficiency going forward. That doesn't necessarily matter if you're going to have all of those touchdowns, but I do think there's a little bit of a balancing effect with his outlook, where if you actually run like a real offense, he would be more efficient, but then you lose this extreme volume portion of the equation. I mean, with Montgomery, you now have the shoulder injury. If they play him at a more reasonable level and emphasize Gibbs, then he becomes even much more almost exclusively touchdown dependent, which in the Detroit Lions offense, that could be perfectly fine. But it will be interesting to see how much and it may be that simply they did all the babying they intend to do in week 12. But if they have to manage that a little bit going forward, then that would be pretty exciting for Jahmyr Gibbs managers. Then as I'm looking at this, one of the things that jumps out is that on the year, there are only 4 backs averaging more than 7 receiving expected points per game: Kamara, Hall, Achane, and McCaffrey. Kenneth Walker and Bijan are just below that, but Rachaad White is also just below that. I guess I would not be surprised if the only other back who really fits in that 4-person group at the top the rest of season is actually Bucky Irving. And if you have that, then it's going to be hard for some of these other guys to outscore him. Now, we know players like Barkley and Henry are living off of efficiency that is just, borderline impossible, but we also don't have really very strong reasons at this point to believe the offenses that have, amplified the crazy talent levels are going to somehow like stop doing that. You're not going to have multiple 70-yard touchdown runs every game, but those fits are so perfect. Those two backs can get away with it without the receiving, probably. So that gets you up to 6 names. Beyond that, I mean, maybe it's just too enthusiastic, but I might be tempted to put Bucky like right after those 6 guys.
Well, so that's where it's really interesting, because my initial response and like knee-jerk reaction is White's going to still play some on pass downs. He's going to play on the long down and distance, obvious pass downs, because they still like defer to him with some of the usage, right? They're going to use Bucky with intent, but they're also going to use White in a way that makes it hard for him to get to the truly elite receiving expected points, except for the fact that that's my initial response is like White's still going to cut in too much, except for the fact that, as I talked about, like the team high value touches on this team are number 1 in the NFL. They're very, very, very high. There might be enough of a pie. And additionally, you mentioned there's two big plays here. I don't know if either of us mentioned it yet. I don't think I did. I talked about the really good run out of deep in their own area in the fourth quarter. In the second quarter, to start a 2-minute drill where they took over from their 14. This is a 17-0 game. It's still early in the game. They throw short to Bucky Irving from their 14-yard line. He weaves through the defense for a 32-yard reception. That was the other big play. They throw to him on 1st and 10. Like that's the intent thing that we're talking about. And he does something that Rachaad White doesn't do. Rachaad White has big plays in the passing game, but Bucky Irving created this big play. And that's something that is a little bit different. And so the big point of why Irving could maybe be this, if people are thinking we're getting ahead of ourselves, again, it's because we both watched this game and we feel that they went not just intentionally to Bucky a ton in the first half. I mentioned he had all 6 of his catches in the first half of this game as they were building their lead. And they were up 24-0, 23-0 at half. And then 30-0 after the first drive of the second half, they go on to win 30-7. It's a different second half. First half, very intentionally getting the ball to Bucky Irving. It's not just that they were doing that with intent because we watched it, like I was saying. It's that also he was effective. They got the feedback that what they were doing was right. Right? Like they came out of the bye and said, we need to prioritize this more. And they blew a team out prioritizing Bucky Irving. He was the offensive engine in the first half, and they absolutely blew a team out. You don't just change that, right? So it's an aggressive thought about where he fits in rest of season and why we're so confident that he's going to keep Rachaad White in a limited role going forward. But those are the reasons that I think the aggression is warranted. So I think we're in the ballpark. We always know that there's a range of outcomes with this stuff, but we're in the ballpark, and it is an aggressive rank, and it's an exciting thing. To the Montgomery point, I did want to say, you mentioned he got banged up. He only played 29% of the snaps. Week prior was at 39%. Week prior to that, 40. Had a game at 56 prior, but 48, 39, 31. This is all working back all the way to their bye. He's had some other games, sub 40%, multiple other games. He wasn't that much lower last week. That's sort of the concern with him is like, you mentioned, I think you are in agreement, but you mentioned maybe this is the last game they'll baby him. I didn't really feel like they necessarily babied him all that much. I felt like it's been, Jahmyr Gibbs played a season high snap share. It was some of that.
Yeah, I just got the impression that with, again, sadly, what Anthony Richardson was doing, that once he got dinged up, they're like, we play again on Thanksgiving. He's not going back out there.
Yeah. But it's not like he would have played. My point is he probably would have played 10 percentage points more of the snaps, which is maybe like, 6 or 7 snaps. It's not like he was missed out on 20 snaps or something is sort of my point. Maybe a few extra carries in the second half helping ice the game would have been there. But he's had some of these games where it's like he only gets 12 touches. I think in this one, he only had 9 or something. And so, yeah, probably he had 11 in this one, a little bit of an outlier. He's had, more touches overall, even though he doesn't play the huge snap shares. If you work back, his touch counts are 18, 13, 20, 10, 12, 13, 13, 26, right? That's going all the way back to week 3. But he's catching passes in every game, at least one, rushing for closer to 10 or 12 carries than the 8 was a season low that he got in this Indianapolis win. So anyway, I think you make a valid point, but I just wanted to note that there's, I don't know why I wanted to note that, because I was making another point that my main point is they start with Montgomery every game. They use him the whole first drive. They seem to think that they're sort of softening up the defense or whatever. And then after that first drive, it really is like 2-1 Gibbs the rest of the game. So if you just remove that first drive and you factor in the fact that, like, look, the Lions are so efficient that they run more plays and gain more yards than most offenses, you really are getting like a true lead back role from Gibbs for the rest of every game, just not that first drive. The rest of the game, it's 65, 70% of the snaps. It's wild.
So Ben, as we wrap up today, I did want to ask you about some things that are sort of specific to us, but also then become more generalized as they go out to questions that listeners and fantasy managers have for how they should approach FFPC fantasy playoffs, or if you're in a normal league and you're making your week 13, week 14 push to get into your league playoffs, how you should play this. It occurs to me that one game I did miss this week, in part because of dealing with all of the traveling, was the Dolphins Patriots game. Now, the Dolphins part of it, we're going to get more feedback on Thanksgiving. So let's focus a bit more on the Patriots side. The Dolphins, I mean, really, you look at them, and I am disappointed for them. It's a team that I really like and have been hoping they would make the playoffs. If they had just managed to not blow some of the games that even with not having Tua, they should have won, we'd be talking about the Dolphins, I think, as the best team in the AFC. Now, that may seem a little bit strange at this point, but I really think that's where they are. Obviously, they humiliated New England. New England had to try and push in the second half just to get this one to be a little bit less embarrassing. They're going to be playing the Colts. And so, one of the choices that we have this week as we try and advance in the main event would be to play a quarterback from one side or the other of that game. The matchup for Anthony Richardson should be much, much softer against the Patriots than it was for the Colts. As a peripheral piece to this, we have Jonathan Taylor, kind of writing him up for the Zero RB universe, and kind of asking that question of, was this the most disappointing game of his entire career? We tend to think of Anthony Richardson, mostly as it relates to him and his ability to maintain a starting job. Can he be good enough that he starts? This is yet another game where I think the answer is no. You really can't start someone who plays the way that he played against Detroit. I completely 100% believe that he needs more opportunities. He needs more chances. You have to let him play the rest of the season. You probably should let him play a big chunk of next year. But again, how do you balance that with competing? But one of the things that jumps out to me, and maybe this is making too much of it, but we see what Derrick Henry is doing with Lamar Jackson. We see what Saquon Barkley is doing with Jalen Hurts. Partly we know that Derrick Henry is, he and Nick Chubb, in part because they don't catch passes, so you kind of put them in this separate category, but certainly would be, if not the guy, in the mix to be considered the best pure runner in the NFL. So there's a huge talent portion of what he's doing that can't be ignored. It's not a separate thing. Saquon Barkley, he looks as good, if not better than he looked as a rookie, a huge talent component on his side. But Jonathan Taylor, in his 68-game career, has played 50% of the snaps and posted single-digit expected points only one other time. He underperformed that and basically didn't score any points. Failed to draw a single target on 23 routes. He and Kyron Williams, again, the way the SIS charts it, ran 44 routes together without a target. That part for me makes my heart sort of clog, choke, stop for a minute.
But with
how much of this is Jonathan
Kyron
Taylor? How much of it is Anthony Richardson? Where are we with these guys?
With Kyron, it's more hard to believe. With Taylor, it's pretty straightforwardly what we know about Richardson, right? Like, and they used him as a design runner a ton early in this game, and it's effective. I think they've done this since they installed him back at the quarterback position. They've basically said, look, early in the season, they were clearly, I think, limiting his rushing and limiting the most effective way to use him, which would be to call a lot of design runs, because I think they were very concerned about the fact that he got hurt on design runs twice last season in 4 games and missed the whole year, right? He got a concussion on a design run, and then he later hurt his shoulder on a design run. And early this year, he's inviting contact right away. And we were all talking about that. This is a concern. That was the Anthony Richardson discussion before we knew that he was going to play the quarterback position bad enough to get benched, and there's going to be a whole different level now. But we are back with him getting back in, and there seems to be this carelessness or not carelessness, carefreeness, right? Where they're like, okay, well, we're no longer that concerned about keeping him from injury because we have more information, that now we just want to find a way to be successful with you. And the only way to do that is we got to be willing to invite some contact. We got to be willing to use you as a designed runner, right? And now the rushing attack flows through you. Taylor has a bad game in this game. Richardson goes 10 carries for 61 yards and is effective as a runner when they're using him that way. I think that has to eventually open things up for Taylor a little bit. The problem is, do you have to respect him as a passer at all? He goes 11 for 28 again. The answer tends to be no. He has a wide open Alec Pierce early in the game, barely overshoots him, much more accurate miss in terms of some of his misses have been so far off this season. That one was close, and he hits Pierce a little later for a 39-yard gain. But again, Downs catches 3 of 7 targets. Pittman has a nice game. His 30-yard catch was a catch and run. Most of Pittman's stuff, from my recollection, was a little bit shorter and underneath, maybe a little intermediate. Doesn't hit any of the other big downfield opportunities. He doesn't get helped by that Ogletree drop that you referenced that would have been a pass TD. It's not fully on him, but clearly he's not a great passer. And so you get this question of, but yeah, I mean, as far as the Taylor receiving, I mean, I would just argue that this is the way it's going to be. It doesn't matter, like Richardson is either going to
and
throw
Barkley
the ball.
and Henry are not catching passes either, just to be clear, but it's you have so much. I mean, it's not even really volume in this offense, but he is out there. I mean, there's always a chance that something would happen with that. But
Barkley's catching. Barkley, for example, is catching some. I would push back on that a little. Like they throw to him some, and Hurts is capable of checking down. Richardson's ADOT in this game was 13.3. He doesn't have any of the short passes that bring the average down. All he does is chuck it downfield or run. That's all. I mean, he's legitimately not capable of checking down, I don't think.
Well, when Colin and I were chatting about this whole thing was sort of evolving for me in real time as I was thinking through it. And I was noting that because of that intentional grounding, they go from a makeable 4th down to a not really makeable 4th down. But then you're like, that's what his ADOT is. Like, if he's going to throw the passes that deep anyway, what difference does 4th and 3 versus 4th and 14 make? Just throw a pass down the field like you do every other play.
He has his ADOTs on the season. I'm going to read them to you. He's the number one for any quarterback that's played a meaningful amount of the season, and it's not close. 16.4, 12.6, 9.7, 14, 10.0, 15.8, 10.5, 13.3. It's been 10 plus in every game except one where it was 9.7. There's not another quarterback in the league that has started a meaningful part of the season that's averaging more than 9.7 for the season. He's done that in every single one of his individual games. Anthony Richardson does not throw the short passes in a way that like Jalen Hurts is going to take off and run a whole bunch of times. And we know Saquon's not catching a lot of passes, but they also have used Saquon as a downfield receiver, at least like twice this year, right? But Hurts will check down some, and some of these other guys will check down some, even though they're mobile. Lamar Jackson will throw to the running back some. It's mostly Justice Hill. It's not been Derrick Henry. It's Justice Hill playing on those downs. But even like the other mobile guys, Jane Daniels has thrown to his backs a ton. Like there is an element of this of like, who's the actual quarterback? And Richardson is just not going to do that. He's only going, to your point, I mean, you could just take a penalty, like go for it on 3rd and 20 or 4th and 20, because every single pass is a bomb from him, or it's him taking off. His scramble rate's not even necessarily that high, but I guess it's just every pass is a bomb, right? Like he just chucks it, even if the guy's not open downfield or what have you. But they don't call a ton of pass plays either. This offense is not fun for fantasy, is what it comes down to. Like in terms of what does it mean for Jonathan Taylor? Like, what does it mean for any other players? I had somebody push back when I had Josh Downs a little bit lower in the rest of season tiers when I did the tiers last week for input volatility. We've referenced a few times. I had him down a little bit, even though I'm constantly writing about how Josh Downs is one of the most exciting players, breakout players of this season. And what I wrote in input volatility game by game, I wrote the the reason for my lack of enthusiasm is Richardson might only complete something like 12 passes. I wrote something like 12 passes, Sean, and it was high. He completed 11. That was like a joke of like how low it could get, but he's done it multiple times this year, right? He has these really low completion games. They don't even throw very much, and then he doesn't complete very many of them. Actually, he has 3 other games with 10 completions on the nose. So,
well, you can't keep drives going when you're
gone above 11 completions twice all year. Two games that he's gone over 11 completions.
And there's the belief that if you throw deep, it's great for fantasy. And that is true. But you do have to be able to extend some drives. You have to have actual possessions. And when you watch this game against Detroit, at a certain point, you're like, I'm rooting for a 70-yard touchdown, because a possession is completely out of the question, right? A drive is out of the question. Right. So working it back in the other direction, and to the Downs point, he gets a decent length pass taken away on, I think, a very sketchy penalty call, and then makes an incredible effort to try and haul in what would have been a touchdown pass, the ball barely overthrown. Again, on that one too, I felt like it was a more accurate miss than some of the other Richardson passes we've seen at points this year. The Patriots have given up 30-plus QB fantasy points to Tua and Matthew Stafford in back-to-back games. What should we be taking from the Patriots, both on offense, but then also in this game where they face Anthony Richardson? And Richardson was coming off of a game the week before where he put up 30-plus fantasy points. He could have multiple rushing touchdowns. It does appear to be one where, now, if Josh Downs doesn't play, which he's not going to play, then suddenly you go from this elite receiving core that maybe they can make some plays for you to one that's, pretty mediocre. That changes it for me a bit. Does the Patriots defense help out here? Or should fantasy managers, if they have any other choices, like, we mentioned that we do, should be looking in a different direction?
I feel pretty, I want to get your thoughts on it more. I haven't given a ton of thought to it, but I feel pretty concerned about the offensive environment in this game. That was my read. You mentioned that the Patriots had to work their way back into that Dolphins game or try to kind of save face. They ended up having a long fumble return for a TD, right? Which was a big part of that. They finished with 15 points, and it was Jalen Wright, I believe, who put it on the ground. Raheem Mostert had the 2 big fumbles. You talked about how the Dolphins haven't finished some games. One of them was against the Colts, where they could have won that game by just forcing Anthony Richardson to try to beat them, except for Mostert had the 1 turnover in the game, a fumble on Miami's side. Neither team was really trying. And there was no real big turnovers or anything. Well, the Colts were trying, but Richardson was having a hard time. And so no one was really sustaining drives. Tua was out, but Mostert turns it over, gives some great field position, and the Colts called the design run on the next play, and Richardson gets like 15 yards and go down and score a touchdown right there. They end up winning that game like 16-10. It was the only TD of the game for the Colts, and it ended up being a field goal battle later. Jason Sanders misses a long kick. That's one of the games the Dolphins gave away, is my point. And Mostert's fumble was like directly, it's like you had to control the ball in that game. It was an old school like 1960s game. Just don't turn the ball over. That you lose the game because you turn the ball over. And then he fumbled again 2 weeks later in against the Bills while they're ahead, and gives the Bills great field position. And the Bills came back and beat him in that game by 3 points. I believe that was the next time he fumbled. And then Jalen Wright this week fumbles. But I'm recounting all of this to say that Devon Achane's just going to keep getting 70+% of the snaps. Like, they were starting to give Wright a little bit more work, but he gives up a fumble that's returned for a TD. I can't believe Mike McDaniel would be pleased with how much the backup running backs are fumbling the football. But anyway, in terms of the Patriots and what that means for the Colts, I'm actually really curious what your thoughts are. The over-under in this game is really low, 42.5. It's not super, super low. Sometimes the games are like sub 40. I've typically been playing like the over in a lot of the Patriots games because I've been excited to play into the Drake May experience, which can be also turnovers for points the other direction, possibly. I had the over in this Dolphins-Patriots game. It did go over, but I got kind of lucky with that fumble return late where Jalen Wright fumbled it. This one I looked at 42.5, and I was like, this is going to be a 16-6 game like that Seattle-Arizona game. I mean, that's the way that my lean was. But do you think there could be more here?
It feels ugly, right? I mean, I want to think that the Patriots defense at this point is bad enough that Anthony Richardson could make mistakes and still have one of his ceiling outcomes. But one of the things, and this is again where I am hoping to get a little bit more uh, color and nuance from you. When I did my rookie re-rank piece recently, I did still have Drake May. I had him rising, had him above Caleb Williams, had him above Bo Nix, had him above Brian Thomas, had him above Marvin Harrison, who is a controversial one because the production hasn't been there at all, but yet the upside still, I think, not in a ton of doubt. Although one of the things I've noted for Harrison, which was the thing I noted in his prospect profile, is that he is a little bit less flexibility in his game than some of the other star receivers. And I do think it requires decent quarterback play. And I don't think the Cardinals can give him that. One of the things I'm seeing as I'm moving through different pieces here are notes about Malik Neighbors not wanting to be with the Giants. I would have to assume that Marvin Harrison doesn't want to be with the Cardinals. But the Drake May experience has not been as exciting recently as I had hoped. And so I'm worried about the ceiling that offense has to make a game interesting, to, do both sides of it, to create big plays, but also big mistakes that would be fun. The receiving core for the Patriots just doesn't give a quarterback anything to work with.
I feel like Kendrick Bourne, who we've liked in the past a little bit here, is doing a little bit. He had 3 catches in this game. They were all on extended plays, and he was coming back to the quarterback a little bit. And the week prior, he had 5 for 70 and a TD. I wrote him up a little bit in last week's input volatility. Was excited to see him play a little more. I thought they would lean into it more. He didn't get any like first read targets. They didn't really lean into it. I feel like the offense is just poorly conceived at this point, and they're asking May to do too much, basically, to be the guy that figures it all out. And he's making some good plays and some good reads, but they should be leaning into the players that are actually doing some things for them. And I don't even know that they're necessarily doing that. The other thing with Bourne is that, if you're in a situation where it's dire enough that you'd be considering him, they ended up pulling him late so that they could get Jalen Polk and Javon Baker some snaps in a blowout. And it's like, okay, well, if he's not even going to play in late game situations, it makes sense. Obviously, they need to develop their young receivers a little bit if they can. But if he's not even going to get snaps in late game situations when they're out of it, that's not great. His role can't actually get bigger. I thought his snaps and routes might go up last week. They didn't, but he started and was playing early and was making a few plays at times, but he still only winds up with a 3 for 30 line. I mean, that's part of it. It's like because the way the offense is conceived, even the guys that are doing a little bit, I think the tight ends are playing okay. Like Austin Hooper is even adding a little bit to Hunter Henry. And those are the guys that May's going to a lot now because, like you said, the other receivers aren't doing much. DeMario Douglas, all his production is wide receiver screens. So I don't know. I think Drake May's super fun. He's been a really good scrambler, and I think he's a good fantasy quarterback because he'll be aggressive and all of those things. I agree with you from the general point that he doesn't have anybody. Like he can't just stand in there and trust Jalen Polk to go win on the outside, which is what the idea was, that these rookies, either Polk or Baker, would emerge. Somebody would do something. KJ Osborne's been inactive lately. Maybe he would do something. It's not there. They cut Tyquan Thornton. I think Kendrick Bourne has this like chance to be decent if they would actually use him a little bit more and sort of like lean into him as a number 1 receiver, because Maine needs whatever they can give him. But they're just doing weird stuff. I don't like the way that they do anything.
That is a fun place to end it. They do weird stuff. I don't like any of the things that they are doing. Ben, we like so much of what's going on out there in fantasy, so much of what's going on in the NFL. As we mentioned, depending on how you're listening to this, but at the beginning of the previous episode, which for us has been one extended experience, we appreciate all of the listeners so much. We're very thankful for our chance to record with each other, but then to share it with you. We appreciate everything that you all are doing for us. It helps us. Right. The algorithm at this point is so important. All those things that you guys do to make that work better is crucial. We are rooting for you on Thanksgiving. Hopefully, those 3-4 games, as they go through, if you're listening to this after this, you're off to a fantastic start in week 13. Ben, as we wrap up, any other specific things you were thankful for?
I mean, I'm thankful for doing this pod with you. I'm thankful for the listeners, but no, not nothing else specific.
We're thankful for Bucky Irving and Chase Brown.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. It's been a fun year. It's been a challenging year, obviously. Some of the listeners feel like they're playing against guys like Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry every week, and it's beating them down a little bit. But there's a lot of fun players still, even in this year where a lot of the running backs stayed really healthy and had a lot of production. And it's fun to sort of be the little scrappy underdog sometimes, like, I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant and all, but we have had some seasons where it's pretty dominant and you feel pretty great about the approach. This year, it's not been the right approach, the dominant approach necessarily. Drafting old running backs early was the right approach. That would have been great. Anyone who started, in my longest running home league, somebody started Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, and he's leading the league in points. That's a good combination to have. But the other builds with Bucky Irving and Chase Brown and those guys coming back in, and if you had a Walker or an Achane or a Gibbs or any of the early round backs that we liked as well, a lot of the other receivers, JSN, some of these guys that are coming on, I mean, they're going to give you a puncher's chance. Like a Bucky Irving JSN team is going to give you a puncher's chance in addition to whatever, early round guys you have. It's a fun, I don't know. It's a fun thing we do. It's fun to see how the seasons play out. This one hasn't been easy, but I'm thankful for the way that the season has played out. It's a fun year. It's a nice change up.
It's been a good one. I haven't always been thinking of it in those terms exactly. You tend to mostly think about the players you are most in on and most excited about. And this has been one of the best years for those guys hitting. It's also been a year, as you described it, where the players that, I mean, we're more or less just straightforwardly out on because historically they don't work, have hit in such a massive fashion that, yeah, that scrappy underdog thing / do you have the depth? Can you go 1 through 10, 1 through 11, whatever your league is, and battle with some of those top scorers? I think the fact that, and again, this is no consolation to people who drafted Rashee Rice or had Nico Collins and aren't going to get in. Some of the other receivers who got injured. But with so many players healthy this year, you're getting a little bit more of a true look at full drafts and full teams and whether or not the full team that you can draft or that you drafted can match up with the full teams that other people drafted. Do you have the best team in the buys? Are you going to be able to handle week 14 if that's a crucial week in your format? And then this contrast or this battle between the Saquon teams, the Henry teams versus the Bowers teams and the deep teams with, maybe Kenneth Walker isn't doing quite enough for you. Maybe, Achane or Gibbs aren't doing quite enough for you, but you have those guys plus the rest of your roster. Are you going to be able to overcome what hopefully will be somewhat diminished massive games?
We're hoping
Barkley.
We're hoping the 40-point games don't hit in weeks 15 to 17. If they do, Sean, the season it'll be a tough one because there's so many good, fun players, the Bowers, the JSNs, the Buckies, all of these guys, Chase Brown. There's just been so many really cool, fun hits. It's been a great year.
Yeah, so good luck to everybody. We're so thankful for you. This has been Stealing Bananas. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, has been Gretch. You can follow at Yards Per Gretch, stealing signals, stealing lines. Ben has that great betting piece out there for you. There's never a bad time to get involved with that. Ben, hit us again with how they can follow you on Blue Sky.
Ben Gretch whatever it is, bsky.social.
Boom. There you go. Follow all of your favorite people, but especially Ben over there. We'd love to have you guys. RotoViz coupon code RVRadio 2024 at checkout for 10% off your 1-year subscription. But specifically, we have the playoff push special going right now. You can use those tools to win your league here down the stretch at a big discount. We love you guys. We'll talk to you soon.